Thank you so much, General Scherz, and thank you to the advisory board and organizers of the Berlin Security Conference. It is really an honor and a privilege for me that you are calling on me to chair this panel on hybrid warfare, which has become a highly relevant topic. And I'm quite pleased that this forum follows the remarks of the Deputy Defense Ministers from Georgia and Ukraine, the Deputy Ministers Luladze and Orlov, the countries of whom were exposed to hybrid campaigns in the past or are still exposed to them. Let me start by saying a few words from a NATO perspective on hybrid warfare. And then I will introduce our speakers in turn for the comments, after which I would like to open the floor for hopefully an interactive discussion. There are still sufficient people here to do that and support me in that ambition. Hybrid warfare is based on a sophisticated model of warfare, a combination of large array of means: political, diplomatic, economic, conventional and unconventional, overt and subversive, cyber attacks and irregular forces, embedded in a huge propaganda campaign, and disinformation. They all are targeted to achieve political, in some cases geopolitical, and strategic objectives. Hybrid campaigns can be applied by both state or non-state actors. For example, Russia, but also ISIL Daesh in the south. And are directed at an adversary's vulnerabilities. Adversaries employing hybrid strategies will seek to remain ambiguous, claim pursuit of legitimate goals, or try to keep their activities below a perceived threshold that would result in a coordinated response from the international community. This includes avoiding direct military confrontation, if possible, although the use of overt military action as part of a hybrid strategy cannot be discounted and has to be always taken into account. At NATO's Wales summit last year, the alliance kicked off some detailed work in a number of areas related to hybrid warfare, including intelligence gathering and sharing, indications and warning, enhancing capabilities, strategic communications, and cooperation with partners and other international organizations. Through this work and the related work on NATO's Readiness Action Plan, it became apparent that an overarching strategy was required. A strategy that could lay out NATO's role in countering hybrid warfare and, most importantly, help to establish the mindset, the appropriate culture, and actions necessary both for allies and in NATO to mainstream our response in line with the evolving deterrence and defense posture. In other words, countering hybrid warfare is becoming our day-to-day business. The strategy on NATO's role in countering hybrid warfare is expected to be endorsed by the NATO foreign ministers in a 2 weeks' time. It is clear that the nation that is exposed to hybrid attack or campaigns is the so-called first responder, and also the hub for coordination of any assistance from the outside. Allies and NATO have identified 3 core functions needed to successfully counter hybrid warfare: prepare, deter, and defend. And prepare is one of the most important, as it deals with improving the resilience of nations, allies, and our organizations. And NATO, as NATO, we support with our military planning and means to deter and defend. Implementation of the strategy is already ongoing and advanced in many areas with both an internal focus and an external focus that leverages the complementary strengths of partners and organizations. Internally, we are focusing on the necessary arrangements and procedures, including effective intelligence, analysis, situation awareness, and rapid decision-making to support appropriate political and military action. This can include the deployment and employment of forces and capabilities for effective deterrence and defense, as well as robust strategic communications. All of it is underpinned by a demanding education, training, and exercise program across the Alliance, including the Council and capitals. And just last week, we had one of these tailored talks exercises with the ambassadors. Externally, our focus is to contribute to an overall response within the international community, with the main focus being to provide coherent support to a nation or group of nations exposed to a hybrid threat. This includes effective cooperation and coordination with partners and international organizations, in particular the European Union, with which progress to counter hybrid warfare has been made in parallel and together. And one can say that NATO and the EU are complementary by default, and together can provide effective and coherent assistance to any nation exposed to hybrid warfare. With that short but substantial presentation about where we are in NATO in terms of developing our strategy, let me now turn to our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist is Lieutenant General James Everard, Commander, Land Forces, British Army. General Everard has commanded the field army of the British Army, all operational troops and reserve units for the past year. He previously commanded at the divisional level as well as brigade level and has significant operational experience, including in Iraq and the Balkans. General Everard's resume also includes a number of impressive general staff appointments, including military strategy and operations. General James, it's a pleasure to welcome you here on the panel today. Perhaps during the course of your intervention, could you give us your view on what is new about hybrid warfare from your own point of view? And with that, the floor is yours.
General, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to start off with a look at history. Between 1919 and 1938, the British were, to quote Basil Littlehart, I know a historian and theorist who's read as much in Germany as in the UK, accused of being ostriches. And he says when their head was jerked from the sand in 1939, their eyes became too angrily bloodshot to keep clear sight of what needed to be done. And his mantra, when faced with an emerging threat, was this: that it was vital not to ignore the question or the exploration of the problem. And I think this, not ignoring the question and the exploration of the problem, is a very sensible starting point given the scale of the challenges that we face, noting that across Europe, NATO and EU partners are doing a great deal of work to think about how we can deter, detect and even defeat a hybrid attack as part of a collective defence model. But I'd argue that we need to do more. And I would argue, I think agreeing with the Chair, that the evolution to hybrid warfare, or whatever we want to call it, and I think perhaps we had a Russian here, he might call it new generational warfare, that the evolution to hybrid warfare is a new challenge in terms of a mindset, in the management asymmetry of information, in the scale and sophistication of application, and even in terms of operational art, design, and in the planning and execution of activity, and certainly in the employment of military capability. I think that the evidence emerging from Crimea, Ukraine, even Syria, shows us that many existing capabilities are being used in different ways to demonstrable effect, and that in many cases we have yet to develop an effective counter as we prepare, deter and defend. Let me just give you 3 examples. First of all, strategic communications. We all know that with the rise of new media, that the monopoly enjoyed by nation states over information has long disappeared. We do operate in a goldfish bowl, and I think the unprecedented proliferation of network devices means that anyone can create and disseminate real-time or near real-time information, or indeed disinformation. This can force our decision makers to act in the present, and in many ways is an anathema to long-term campaign design. I think we've always believed that a good narrative should crown and capitalise on a coherent and effective strategy, and cannot be a strategy in itself, and is certainly no substitute for one. But again, I'd argue that when you look to hybrid warfare, this perhaps gives a primacy to information operations that is new, and in some cases is the strategy built around a narrative. So hybrid warfare is, amongst other things, warfare in the information age. I think it demands fresh thinking and a new counter, hence the importance of strategic communications at an alliance and national level, and I would say that I think we need to do better. 2, I think the need to think has never been as important as we develop not only better conceptual but physical responses to some of the challenges that we face. And again, I look to the lessons emerging from Ukraine, and I say that there are things that we need to counter, copy, or indeed create new capabilities to give us the edge. I won't go through a long list, but I would mention the persistent layered presence of UAVs. I'd mention real-time targeting of increased lethality with better munitions, both precision and area fires. I'd mention improved tank survivability, leading to what some people call the rebirth of the tank. I would list cyber, particularly at my level, the attacks on the operational tactical CIS interface, and I'd talk about survivability of light vehicles and dismounted infantry. And to refer to something that Colm Uthler talked about, our own speed of movement within NATO boundaries. Yes, you can say that all these examples are hybrid capabilities, or simply an evolution of conventional capabilities in a hybrid setting. But in either case, we do need a better response. Next, 3. This is really to say that I think success in the hybrid space can, when you look at it, appear very easy for those people that work with a single all-powerful decision maker. That to win in a hybrid campaign requires a comprehensive plan, owned and constantly reviewed by a single empowered authority. The counter to this view, though, is to recognise the huge efforts already made by European countries to respond to hybrid tactics, and that, when NATO decides it wants to, it can move very quickly. And I think the alliance brings with it that wisdom of crowds and resources that will bring a greater resilience to the planning and execution of operations than we perhaps have seen recently. Lastly, I think we need to move away from today is a tomorrow you worried about yesterday, today is a tomorrow you thought about yesterday. I acknowledge the difficulty in agreeing a definition of hybrid warfare. I know that many people agree that a definition may be so broad, so generic to offer little additional benefit. And I think the problem is that in trying to describe conflict today, we have ended up with a host of descriptors. Not surprising, each conflict is different in longevity, in intensity, and in the mix of overt and covert state and non-state actors. However, I do think, so that we explore the problem, there is enough common ground to agree a definition under a single label. Hybrid warfare is as good as any, as we seek to develop an effective response. because I truly believe when the Alliance gets its act together, we are unbeatable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John Everard, for your inspiring and at the same time comprehensive intervention on the British perspective, so to speak, on hybrid warfare. And I would like to move on to our next panelist, Lieutenant General Dr. Klaus Olshausen. General Olshausen served the Bundeswehr for 42 years in national and multinational formations and headquarters, and was also president of the Clausewitz Society. In his last assignment, General Olshausen represented Germany and the German Chief of Defense in the Military Committee of NATO and the European Union, I should say military committees, plural. And in that capacity, he had to accept that I was serving for him at that time. John, thank you very much for being with us today, and given your experience in NATO and the European Union, I would appreciate it if you might reflect on how political decision makers should respond to hybrid warfare. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, General Brauss, for your introduction, and I'm glad to be here again on the Berlin Security Conference, which I have attended for many years. Before I go to the decision-making or political response question, let me make sure that there are two things for me that go with what we now call hybrid warfare. It's a composition of many elements that we use for power politics, and that creates for the one that is hit by this power politics with a big ambiguity. And with those two elements, the decision makers have a very difficult time, much more difficult than when you have a conventional attack and you know where you are and what's happening. So let me touch on at three levels on the political decision makers' response. The individual, that means the personalities that you would need, that you would have to bring up to deal with it. And then at the national level, and I take the German example, and at the multinational level, and I of course refer to what General Brauss has already mentioned for NATO. At the individual level, I think we need personalities that really are not specialists just on one area of those diversified instruments, but they have a view of how those different instruments that are used by power politics fit together. So just the agglomeration of things to know is not good enough. So it has to be absorbed, and it has to create the kind of a, let's say, genuine capability from this knowledge to be ready to act under this ambiguous situation that a nation may be in, or a group of nations. And if that happens, it becomes even more challenging. So we have heard about the uncertainty, we have heard about the chance that happens in these kind of fields. And if this is all there, and if the personalities are hit every minute, every day by different information that try to give the impression that they would have to change their views, but they don't change the views because another information is coming in another direction, that requires people, personalities, that in those uncertain, obscure situations can use their intellect in a way that they find in these gray areas still the truth on the basis of what their intention or what their survival is, the truth, and then not only find it, but have the courage to act under this ambiguity in action. If they would not be willing, if they would delay decisions although they have known, identified it, then of course things can easily go worse for nations or for a group of nations. And of course, as it was mentioned here with the strategy, you need in this area a clear standpoint what you are going to defend and how you are going to defend it. And it's only with this standpoint you have as a personality, you then build as a national government, and then of course you go to 28 plus 28, which makes 40, because there are some that are not in both organizations. and this is beyond the personal individual a great challenge. When you go at the national level, I mean, we have been discussing first vernetzte Sicherheit, now we call it comprehensive approach. A lot of instruments that we use for our politics, and we of course tend to create an international community where each nation can use their own elements in a positive way. But those elements that we are using in our comprehensive approach can be used negatively, of course, to put pressure on individual nations or others. So when we think about hybrid warfare or those elements, then we have, it's just a comprehensive approach in reverse to a certain extent. So it's already there, and we have to make sure how we can deal with it. Now, one thing for me in looking at the national level, coordination is not good enough. We need something that binds all those elements together, and whether in the German situation, the National Security Panel or Cabinet Commission, the Bundessicherheitsrat is an area which finally can do more than just arms export decisions, remains to be seen. But you need something who is leading it. I mean, in my government, if there is a hybrid wartime situation, this cannot be an individual ressort minister to do it. There has to be something else. So in our constitution, if we are under defense, it's clear that the Chancellor is the one with command authority. And that brings me to the next point, and to the last on the national level. Do we still have a realistic reading of the defense clause in our constitution? We think in defense on territorial, let's say, defending our borders. We still do that. But this kind of war attacks us at different ways in different areas, and it's still an attack. And so I think we'll have to look into this, and we have to create an understanding in our societies that this new threat can even be worse than the attack on the territorial border. And that leads me to the multinational level. I mean, when the Alliance put forward its strategic concept in 2010, with great attention, I looked at missing one word in relation to the Article 5. In the strategic concept, there is not the relation to an armed attack. It's a relation to an attack. And that is already, obviously, a reaction to the fact that you can be attacked by many things. Whether it's terrorists or information attack on cyber, so many things are there. That means the basis for how we deal with it at 28, be it in the European Union, be it in NATO, is already written down. Now we have to find a consensus. What is crisis management and where starts defense? It's blurred, like internal and external security. So we'll have to make sure that our decision makers work on this issue by creating, as far as possible, a common understanding, not only of their common interests, but how they identify and how they look with early warnings and intelligence at the new threats, and where they come together and find out that they need action. To put the action on the place requires to have beforehand the capabilities that you can act. And that is even more difficult and more expensive. But both has to come together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, General Olshausen, for this stimulating and thought-provoking presentation. It is indeed telling that the strategic concept is talking about attack. And it also implicitly makes clear that Article 5 and conventional and collective defense is not necessarily the same. In other words, within the scope of hybrid warfare, we are now developing the notion that the Council can decide on Article 5 and enact defense without a clear military threat, if 28 nations feel threatened through hybrid attacks. With that, I would like to turn to our third panelist, who is General Ben Hodges, and I will not introduce him. He is already was introduced and well known, but I know that General Hodges is a strong supporter of NATO, and you have experienced this today. And it is our pleasure to have him take the stage again as a member of this forum. General, given your NATO land command experience and the role you play in United States bilateral relationships in Europe, can I ask you to perhaps reflect on how nations and alliances need to adapt to hybrid warfare?
Sure, thank you. Hybrid warfare or new generation warfare is Russia's answer to NATO. It attacks our center of gravity, which is the cohesion of the alliance. That's why they created it. They couldn't match the strength of the alliance from the economies and populations and capabilities, so they go after our center of gravity, which is our cohesion. And by extension, they come after the cohesion of the EU. So I'm sure that their number one objective is to make sure that NATO cannot be a balance to their own ambitions, which is to spread wherever there is possibility. So that's why they created this new generation approach. They want to create doubt in the minds of a member that just because they threaten, and I think General Brauss just described it, certain things that are not necessarily clear, what's an attack. They can do certain things to one country or in a region, and the other countries would wonder, like, that's not really an attack. And we're distracted with other problems anyway, and so once they begin to create that doubt in the mind of collective defense, an attack on one is an attack on all, then they have begun to tear at what makes the alliance so effective, and we lose our deterrent effect. And they do it so fast before we can respond. There's two especially effective characteristics of this new generation warfare that I would want to address very briefly, and they are particularly difficult to defeat. One is disinformation, or the use of information, and the second one is what I would call lawfare, the use of the law, or twisting of legal instruments to create an effect. So disinformation focuses on controlling the narrative and assigning blame by employing what I would call the 4 Ds: dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. Now, all credit for that construct goes to a friend of mine, Ben Nemo, who some of you may know. Dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. Dismiss. There are no Russians in Crimea. What are you talking about? Apparently those are young men that went to a hunting store and found equipment. Now, for us, it's unbelievable to say that, but when the president of a country says that publicly, there are no Russian soldiers there. I personally would not want to be a Russian soldier to get sent off to a place and be abandoned the way they are. Distort. NATO is enclosing Russia. Our alliance is an organization formed by nations asking to join it. This is not an empire that gobbles up other countries. It is an alliance that was formed by people asking to join it. And then the members have to decide, yes, our security is better if we allow this other country into our alliance. I don't know anybody that's knocking on the door of the Kremlin saying, please let me in. I want to be under the protective wing of the Red Army. Distract. I am sure that the Russians went to Syria, number one, to secure their place, make sure they didn't lose their foothold in the Middle East. They don't care about Assad, what they care about is maintaining their place there. They did it to demonstrate to their own domestic audience as well as to the rest of us that yes, we are a global power too. Look at these missiles we can shoot from the Caspian Sea. I was impressed, by the way, I didn't know they had that. But it's more expensive to shoot that missile and you get not even the same effect as you would from a Sukhoi going into Syria, but they wanted to demonstrate that they have the capability. But the real reason they went there was to distract attention away from Ukraine, to make sure we all forget that there are 25,000 Russian soldiers sitting in sovereign Ukrainian territory. And then finally, dismay. Denmark, you will be a nuclear target if you join any ballistic missile system. Sweden, you will become a nuclear target. Sweden, the home of ABBA, you are a nuclear target. Dismiss, distort, distract, dismay. The second is lawfare, the twisting of the law of treaties and legal instruments to confuse people what's going on. Now some of these things, when I first heard them, I couldn't believe it. But there are members of the Duma who have said, I don't think that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was actually legal. I'm not talking about an idiot sitting in his mother's basement. I'm talking about a member of the Duma who talks like this openly and puts forward 2 years in a row laws to declare the dissolution of the Soviet Union illegal, and therefore calling into question the legitimate independence of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Now we may think that's laughable. Our allies in those countries don't think it's laughable. And in fact, Russia last year passed a law calling for extradition of 70,000 young men from Lithuania who in 1989 and 1990 would normally have recruited for service in the Soviet Army, but because of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was no longer a Soviet Army. And so the Lithuanian government told all those young men, no need to go to the recruiting station, to the depot, because you no longer are required to be in the Red Army. So they didn't go. So last year, Duma passes a law for extradition saying that they are all what we would call a draft dodger. They failed to show up for duty, and they now all should be arrested. Now again, when I heard that, I thought, nobody would do that. That makes no sense. The Lithuanians take it serious, so much so that the foreign minister of Lithuania told all 70,000 of those young men, do not leave the EU unless you're going to the US or some other place, because there are countries that have extradition agreements with Russia. So the chief of the Lithuanian army, by the way, is one of those officers. He cannot even go into countries outside the EU. And when you look at the economy of Lithuania, it is so closely tied to Belarus. But yet, 70,000 men. So this is how they use the law to put pressure. So what do we do about it? I actually talked about it earlier, and I don't want to repeat it, except to say that we know what the playbook is, recognize the 4 Ds, shine the light on it, transparency by us. We have a better narrative to tell, and we've got to work on speed. Speed, which gives our political decision makers options. Thank you.
Jean Hodges, very many thanks for this lively presentation of the 4 Ds, which are even new for us in NATO headquarters, and a good idea for inclusion in the strategy. Your clear view on what Russia's intent and way is to conduct hybrid campaigns. Our final panelist is Major Jean-François Parlanty, the Director, Joint Forces Center for Concept Development, Doctrine and Experimentation at the École Militaire in Paris. He was so kind to be here in place for General Gratien, Maire, who couldn't make it to be with us today. But we are happy that with General Parlanty we have a French voice in this panel. General Parlanty is a gunner.
Marine.
Yes, I am.
I'm a Marine gunner.
Marine gunner.
I'm a Marine. Army Marine. Because in the French Army, we have Marines in the French Army, not in the Navy, not in the other service.
I'm so sorry. I thought we had something in common. But apparently you're much more valuable, John, than I. Not only because you are Marine, but you are French, of course. He took part in several overseas operations, for example in Lebanon, in UNIFIL, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina within S4, where I also served, so we have something in common. He also was appointed head of the Arms Control Division at the Joint Headquarters, and head of the Armed Forces Employment and Doctrine Center. General Parliamentary, it is a pleasure to have you with us, given your broad experience. I would like you, or invite you, to reflect on measures that might be adopted in the alliance framework in response to hybrid threats. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to present General Gratien, Maire. Apologize for not being here this afternoon, but you understand that the current events require him to stay in Paris. The second, although I am a doctrine center commander, I will not give you any definitions about hybrid warfare this afternoon. Because in the light, and my first thought is very much about in the light of the evolution of our security environment, and after the events in Paris last week, one of the main challenges today seems for our democracies, for our collective security organization, for European Union as well, and for our armed forces, not to be only event or combat proven, which is already something to be combat proven or event proven, but we have also to be event and combat proof. And hybrid warfare is a part of that, hybrid warfare proof. Regarding this topic, although we might choose a slightly different definitions, there is no doubt that from a military standpoint we all share a common understanding of what is behind hybrid warfare and the challenges this presents for us. Hybridity, it has been said earlier, is as a strategy, and its implementation in warfare is not new. It's not new in itself. Not new in itself. Indeed, ambiguity has always been part of the use of the sets, instruments of power, levers, including proxies, and available methods in order to achieve one's goal while keeping a low profile or being under a threshold of visibility. It is not new. What is very new in my mind is what we may call the evolution of the genetic code of nowadays and future conflicts. Changes in the very nature of conflicts favor the use of hybrid warfare to the benefit of the states resulting to it. And I must say that today we are facing what we may call a phony war. And for French, that does mean something, you know. Phony war. It's neither a world war, no peace, maybe not Cold War, but rather a globalized war. First, there is a combination, of course, of courses of action ranging from medieval method and barbarian rhetoric to gesticulation and use of contemporary assets, while there is a quest for sustainable development. Second, population do no longer represent potential collateral damages only. They have become a major stake of conflicts in which perception has become if not the, new global command. It is a new field of operation we need to penetrate and operate into. And this does apply to our own populations. Third, easier access to technology, and particularly the use of cyberspace, are of great strategic importance to spread ideas, ideologies, propaganda, and franchised concept, regardless of borders. We all have IP address. We all are IP address. While having a dilution and low visibility capacity. Furthermore, we have noticed there is less or no superposition between the use of force and legal compliance, that there are no-go areas as well as lawless areas, and that they are fighters with different status than combatants and without always identity. And finally, we have become short-minded in terms of the time we dedicate to crisis anticipation and resolution, under political, economic, and media pressure. So in short, hybrid warfare is not the challenge, but rather a challenge that is reinforced by the factors I just mentioned. Such environment provides states, which are UN members, with the opportunity, the temptation, the attempt to behave like non-governmental entities when some non-governmental entities or some entities attempt to behave like states. Now the question is, what are the challenges of this challenge, of what is the challenges of hybrid warfare? First, we have to regain initiative over the environment of security. Regain initiative over the environment of security, not always reaction. This means to aim at a long-term strategy, to shape the environment. It implies prevention, a long-term vision. We have to make the necessary efforts to understand each other's thoughts. There are other ways of thinking, you know, and sometimes we forget that. In the operations, current ongoing operation, we think about using anthropologists in the fights we wage against the enemy today, you know, to understand what is in the mind of the other, and not only, you know, mind sharing altogether. Second, should strategy fail, we need to exchange intelligence and information so as to acquire situational awareness in time and as needed, to make a sound political decision in order to deter, mitigate, regain initiative over the actor of hybrid warfare. But in all cases, we should act with constancy, by knowing who we are, what are we doing together, what do we want, what are our red lines, so we can build trust and cohesion together. And others are to know what we are and what we want. Second, persistency of effects, and of course the coherence between the thrust of our endeavors and the means dedicated to it. That does imply, first, military credibility, and you know that military credibility is a product. The product between the willingness, it's a product multiplied by capabilities, multiplied by the resilience and endurance to maintain our ability to quickly provide a military response tailored to the need. And second, and that has been said earlier, we need a comprehensive approach, since hybrid warfare use also and especially non-military courses of action. But today, the main challenge is very much to face actors with no threshold of visibility, with no ambiguity, no limits. Actor as Islamic State or Boko Haram. This is why our president has stated on Monday in front of the parliament that security has become France's top priority, with higher defense resources in terms of budget and strength. And he asked also for a greater assistance and cooperation, especially with our European allies, to fight against our enemy, our common enemy, and in areas where we are engaged today. Thank you very much.
Marie, thank you very much for this very clear and comprehensive presentation about the elements and dimensions of hybrid warfare and how to counter it from a French point of view, which is always very analytical and clear. Thank you very much, Jean Parmentier. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the presentations of the four panelists were not only very rich and very well considered, but have clearly shown the character of hybrid warfare and the breadth and depth of the instruments supplied. I think it's worth calling to mind that hybrid warfare is not new, and it's about warfare. And warfare is about achieving political and strategic goals. To apply a word from Clausewitz, one could argue hybrid warfare is conducting warfare with other means, with different means. And our panelists have made clear how important the information domain is, the perception of people, the attempt to influence mindsets and decision makers. And also have highlighted the key means to counter it. It is about situational awareness, to have the courage to recognize and attribute developments to attackers, and to decide even in view of uncertainty and ambiguity. In other words, with a certain level of risk. And fourth, it is important to recognize the technological dimension of hybrid warfare and our vulnerabilities, in particular in the cyber field. Cyber defense and cyber attacks is a key element of hybrid warfare against which we need to defend. Most importantly, however, it is about creating resilience now in order to be able to counter and respond to rapid campaigns in a crisis effectively and successfully. And it's important to apply or be aware of the 4 Ds. I would call them the Hodges 4 Ds. Discuss, dismiss, distract, distort, and dismay. That is exactly what hybrid warfare is targeting at, the perception of our people and our decision makers. With that, I would like to open the floor to questions and comments from the audience. Please, John Hammond.
John Hammond, former General of the Air Force and now President of the Clausewitz Society. It has been mentioned several times that hybrid warfare more or less requires a comprehensive approach to defend against hybrid warfare. So I would like to ask the question to the panel, who would provide authority to coordinate these measures, different measures of cyber hybrid warfare defense when we regard it as a common task of a government or common task of a nation?
I think
it's one of your favorite themes, isn't it?
Yes. I think the cohesion that was mentioned and the understanding that we have to create of what our substance of our living is the basis of defining the challenges and the requirements. Now, it remains open when a community of nations of 28, even an individual nation, comes to the point to recognize and then to act that what is happening at the moment is this kind of warfare. It's aid to put something on you which you would not like to have happen. But I think we are, as it was mentioned in the previous panels, the mindset for rapid response, for people coming together and delivering certain things for these rapid response elements has changed already by the event that happened in the Ukraine. Now, whether this is consistent, whether we will stay there, I don't know. But the challenges for those political leaders, for the members in our society, to really get a hand on the new issues, the new challenges, and make sure that not just the scientists or the military personnel or the other individuals in certain ministries understand it, but to get that knowledge about this into the broader kind of our society. And only if we are successful in doing that in our individual society, the courage will improve of the political leaders to take on the kind of decision making in still unclear and not unambiguous situations, but that are threatening substance of our societies.
From a NATO point of view, it's easy for the Russians. They have just created a huge modern headquarters under the command of the Chief of General Staff, who can draw upon all of government departments and ministries. Very interesting. It's much more demanding for 28 democracies. In the first place, it is a nation concern. A nation that are exposed to hybrid attacks have to coordinate and make sure that they are resilient. Second, we need to make sure that NATO and the European Union are coherent in their support. And that is also a new element. We are working on a new type of coordination cooperation between NATO and the EU in supporting our allies or member states to stand hybrid attacks with our needs. The European Union, broad spectrum, we with our military needs. Other questions? Please.
Last question.
Commodore Kumsun, Defense Advisor, Ghana. Ukraine considers Russia now an enemy, and that's why Ukraine is seeking the umbrella of NATO. Are we concerned that as NATO enlarges to combat the former states of the Soviet Union, that NATO will acquire this anti-Russia flavor? And would that enlargement not threaten world peace? Thank you.
I'm not sure whether I got everything, but I think it had become clear in the previous discussion, particularly yesterday, when Sandy Washburn was here and said that the NATO view vis-à-vis Russia, particularly we have tried 20 years to create a strategic partnership with the Russians. Since 2014, we have learned this is not actually possible. Now we have to find a way to deal with Russia in the future, but not only with Russia, but also with all the other threats and challenges in the east and in the south of Europe and NATO. And we are developing a strategy to do that, including a strategy to successfully counter hybrid warfare. And I have been told to stop here, but I don't do that without great thank you to the panelists, which have successfully presented the breadth and depth of what hybrid warfare is and what we can do about it. Thank you very much.